chizapi tipiziwi tome machiapi na iamaslaha emataha. Yahipi chalila wokunapunta echichiapi. I want to introduce our guests. We'll get started. What I want to, I guess, just set up the conversation that we're going to have. I invited my these three Mohawk relatives, so they came from across the border, and they want to share with our people. The reason I invited them was because of how much they've inspired me, and I was able to we're in the same program as Ionhin Howie and Garhone. We're at the University of Victoria in a Masters in Indigenous Language Revitalization program together. And when I started the program, I'm a learner of Lakota. My parents are Dakota and Nakota. They were far advanced in their language, and it was really inspiring. And because of COVID, most things were online, and we'd have a time where we would be on a break and they would visit, and they would be visiting very fluently, very proficient, really advanced in their language. And my children really loved it. They would listen in, and they would always say, "Mom, what language is that? I really like when the Mohawks visit in your classes." And they inspired our home and myself as an individual. And the main thing that I want to share, the reason my reasoning for asking them to come is to help our people see things and shed some light on where we really need to help ourselves. And so one thing that I wanted to share was our language is at a complete standstill. There's no fluent speakers who have fluent speaking children or grandchildren. So the fluent speakers now who are first language fluent speakers, that's where that natural transmission of language stopped. And there's no exception to that in any community across Ocheti, Shako, and Kamakoje. The language has completely stopped. And so now we're at a point on a timeline of our people. And we have to decide if we're going to intentionally recreate language for our homes and our families, because it's going to keep declining. It's not going to naturally happen. We have to take the initiative, and we have to intentionally work hard to do that. So if there are any of you listening who your dreams of what you want for your language match and align with what you're willing to do for your language, you're going to be really inspired by their words and their journey, because that's what they did. They had hopes, dreams, goals for their language, and they put in the work, and it's decades. But you can see the results because Garhone and Ionhin Howie are not first language speakers, but they learned to be fluent speakers, and now they raise their children as fluent speakers, first language speakers. So they went up and they reversed that decline for their people. But it has to be your want and wishes for your language have to match the work you're willing to do for it. And that's what they did. And that's what's inspired me and my family. And I feel really hopeful when I hear them talk their language, because they're so advanced, and it's so beautiful to be around them and to hear about raising their children to be first language speakers, and knowing and inspiring me that it can be done. And so if your heart is open to hear their message, I hope that you can hear it, because it's a beautiful message that our language can live on again. Also, encourage our people to really think about making your vision and your dream and your love for our language and people to be bigger than your willingness to fight, pout, judge, or hurt each other. That you have to make your want for the language, your heart for the language, bigger than anything in any room that you're in any day. And so I just want to share that much, set the foundation for them to be able to share their story with you all.
Wat kunnen we dat doen? Jullie gaan we wax en wat we kunnen ook hagen, wax kan je wat ik kan maken, niet doen again. Dus jullie gaan we en yes, you mentioned prepare clan. I guess I could just share a little bit about my journey. I didn't have any language growing up. My grandmother was a first language speaker, but she didn't teach her children. And I remember sitting at her table with her and my great aunts all the time and trying to really understand what they were saying, because they would speak to each other in Oklahoma, but they didn't actually teach me at the time, because my grandmother went to a residential school and felt, well, it's not, she didn't want to teach her children because she didn't want them to get beat up the way that she did. And but for me inside, I always had this passion. I always wanted to learn. I always felt like it was something that was important. So when I got older, I learned as an adult, really. I mean, I learned a little bit in school here and there, words and simple phrases and things like that. But I mostly learned as an adult. And what I did was I just found any way that I could to learn, expose myself to people, visited elders, and took any class that there was available. But what really pushed me was when I had children. I wasn't a speaker yet. When I had my first son, I was probably novice at best. And I would speak to him and whatever I could. But by the time he was 2 years old, I couldn't keep up with him. And but I tried, and I did my best. By the time this guy was born, this is my son, Gazahayandu. He's 22 years old. Myself and his father were both second language speakers by then, like a little bit more proficient, maybe intermediate, I'd say. And we made a commitment when he was born that we would only speak to him in Guahuana. We didn't speak English at all at home, and we decided to homeschool. And then we had another son, Hagayade. So he was born in 2000, Zagayade was born in 2002. And when Zagayade came, it became easier, actually, to speak with both of them. It felt like there was more people to converse with. But the thing is that as a family, we were isolated, I guess you can say. Just as a family, like my kids were really isolated in the home because we were trying to not expose them to English. even though they spoke, like he was a speaker, when he went outside and interacted with other people, he was extremely shy. And because everybody spoke English. So I noticed also that there was my family, there was Carjona's family, and there was a few other families, maybe about 5 of us that I can think of, that were trying to raise first language speakers in our homes. We were all second language speaking parents trying to raise first language speaking children. When we first started, when he was born and we made that commitment, I was really, really scared because I felt like, I don't know if I can do this, but I had the support of his dad. His dad was more proficient than I was by that point. And we just went with it because we knew it was important. And but it was scary, and I felt like I was isolating him a bit too much. And then fast forward to a few years later, when I noticed that we were isolated. I reached out to the other mothers who I'm friends with also, but we're friends, but we weren't friends, but we didn't hang out all the time or anything like that. And we reached out, I found out what they were doing in New Zealand. They had language nests going on with parents involved. And so we got together and decided that we would start our own language nest. We operated out of our longhouse. We volunteered our time and we found money to hire a first language speaker. And we brought our children with us. And what I noticed in my children is that when we got together at that longhouse, we did it every day for 2.5 years. And what I noticed is that they flourished. They were socializing with each other. Kids were playing with each other in Uguayhuayneja. And I found for this guy, he opened up big time. Because people understood him and he understood them. And it became this social network amongst our families. So we did that we volunteered our time for 2.5 years, and then we kind of didn't have the money or the resources to continue. We were, and life happened. Me and his dad had split up at that time, and for me, I guess, I started working in the schools. I became a teacher, and they had to go to school. So, fast forward, actually during that time I noticed it became increasingly difficult for myself as a single parent to keep up the language in the home. They went to school, they came back with English. They had learned English in school. And I had a hard time to keep it away. And I felt a lot of guilt for allowing English into my home. But their dad never stopped speaking to them in Uguayhuayneja, and he never stopped speaking to me in Uguayhuayneja. So it kept me motivated to continue. But there still came the struggles. When I had my youngest son, he's 9 years old now. I had him in 2013, and a friend of mine who was in the previous language nest with children that she was babysitting, she would bring them to the language nest just so that she could be exposed to the language. We talked about it, and we decided that we would start another language nest for ourselves and our babies. We wanted support for ourselves. We We wanted our babies to have a social network, and we wanted to help other families. So we developed our program. This time we surveyed the community and checked out, we tried to find out what the interest was. If there was interest in this, and 100% of the surveys came back as yes, there was interest. So we started in May of 2014, and we're still operating today. We've evolved, made a lot of changes over the years, and but we're seeing very, very good results. We see parents, second language speaking parents raising first language speaking children. And it's not easy. There's been, a lot of times where we had our struggles, but every year we look at what we're doing, we look at our successes, and we look at what's not working, and we try to change it. And every year it gets better and better. And now we're taking in those who want it. They want it. You can tell, you can see it. They want it so bad. We have the adult immersion program, which Juan can talk about. I've attended, his dad attended, my son attended, even as a first language speaker, he attended. And it's been very successful. And we still have a long way to go. We really do. But there's a lot of good things happening. I guess you could say there's a momentum that's been created in our community. There's a lot more families speaking in the home, which was our goal, because we felt like even though we had immersion schools, we had elementary immersion since the late 70s. It didn't produce fluent speakers as adults. When they became adults, they weren't raising their children to be speakers as a result of the immersion program. And we felt like a lot of the burden was resting on the shoulders of the children. And it was too much. The children were going home to English-speaking homes. They were learning at school. They were expected to carry on the language. They were expected to carry it forward for future generations, but they didn't have any support. So I feel like that's what we're trying to create now. We're trying to create that support, and social support, social interaction, networking is one of the most important things that we can do. And having adult speakers who are proficient enough to speak confidently to their children at home is equally important. I'm going to hand it over now. I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to hand it over because I feel like I've talked long enough. No.
Well, I'll sit down and get a little bit comfortable. Geez, I'm not used to holding something like this close to my face. thing I said is I give greetings to everybody here, all the people who brought themselves in. And also thank you to TPZB for inviting us out here to come to talk to you. And hopefully that it'll be a help for everybody here. Maybe it'll be something useful for you to help you in your endeavors that you are doing. My name is Garhoanen. I'm a Wolf Clan person. I'm married. I have 4 children. And what else did I say? I don't remember. Oh yeah. I'm 47, and I've been doing this, learning to speak in Mohawk for I think about 27 years now. I started when I was 18 years old. So as I'm listening to her, I'm thinking about what I want to say, and trying to respect the time limits that we have here, and try to give really useful information as possible. So where we come from in Gahnawaga, we're close to the same age, her and I. I think I'm a little bit older, right? 1 year older than her, yeah. So when we were children, I was born in 1975, and at that time, they said everybody over 30 could speak Mohawk on our reserve. And at that time, I think the population was about 5,000 people or so. So that kind of pushes the generation date of first language speakers to the 40s. So all of our first language speakers, or the majority of them that are still living, were born in the 1940s. And by the time we came around, our generation, that first generation, well, that last generation, I guess you could say, of mother tongue speakers noticed that, we didn't teach our kids, and now we got grandkids. And they kind of noticed, like, real fast, like, they kind of got scared and said, like, where's our language going? Because it was going in the graveyard. That's where it was going. And we're taking it with them. And so they kind of put their heads together, and it kind of coincides with some social and political things that were going on at the time, with taking control of education on the reserve from the provincial government and federal government. And they created the first class of Mohawk immersion. They started with nursery and kindergarten age children, and they had that class running for a few years, and they were able somehow, I don't really know the whole history of how they wound up doing it off the top of my head without being too long in the tooth, but they wound up creating an immersion school from 1st grade to 6th grade, elementary school, and that school is still running today. As I grew up, in the same school system as her, we had our own school system on the reserve, and we had Mohawk class every day, 1 hour a day or 45 minutes a day or something like that. And so we would learn some basic phrases and words and things like that. So almost everybody there can say names of objects and what things are called, and maybe some simple phrases. Be quiet, go to bed, eat, where's the bathroom? Things like that. That's basic, really basic language. And I went to high school. We went to high school. We saved high school together and that. And I was 17, just shy of 18 when we were graduating that year. In high school there on the reserve, it was kind of a campus style, and there was a cafeteria there outside one day, and I was sitting out there with my friends during lunchtime. And one of my friends says, well, I guess no more Mohawk. And I was like, damn, I never thought of that, Just being in school all the time and taking that for granted, that there's somewhere to learn all the time. And I was like, damn, what the heck, But, I was just a kid, right? So what could I think of, in terms of anything? And so I graduated and I applied to a college about 2 hours away. My cousin was there, and our friend was there. I stayed there in a dormitory with them. And I was there for about a month. And I had enough, because they said there was nothing there for me. I didn't connect to any of the things that was happening in this college. And at the time, my father was a school teacher on a small school on a reserve called Indian Way School, and they had a Mohawk immersion program for nursery and kindergarten kids. So I called home and I said, I'm done with this. So I'm coming home this week and I'm packing up and I'm coming home. I don't want to be here. He says, well, all right. He says, what do you want to do? He says, you can't just lay on a couch. You gotta work or go to school, do something, you know, you can't just lay on a couch. You're a man, I can't pay for you to live, you know. I said, I want to learn Mohawk. He says, well, I'll ask you where I work. They got an immersion program. If you volunteer there. I said, he said, well, that's good. That'll be good. And so, I guess it was that week. And anyways, I went back home, brought all my stuff back, and went to nursery and kindergarten at age 18 on the next Monday. So I went in and I knew the one woman. She had been a substitute teacher for our hourly Mohawk class there for a while. I knew who she was, but I didn't know her personally. And there was another woman there. That woman, her name is Kanadiso. The other woman, her name is Guanasi. And I walked in and it was a little bit, you know, past their start time in the morning. It was maybe like whatever time they had a snack at, the little fellows, you know. And it was in a house. It was a small house. So I went in a house there and they were showing me around, and in one room the kids were all eating their food, their snacks, and they're drinking their juices and that. And I heard them all talking in Mohawk. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm never even going to speak as good as these 4-year-old kids and 5-year-old kids. It was so intimidating, you know, super intimidating. I was like, man, what did I get myself into? Maybe I should have just stayed away, you know. Could have did something a little bit less intimidating, like going to war or something, you know. And I was like, holy shit. My wife tells me I swear too much when I do these kind of talks, so I'm trying to bite my tongue on that, because I usually do swear a lot in English when I talk in English. But it kind of transitioned pretty easy because, you know, they were talking only in Mohawk to these small children. And being a little bit older, I was able to get the gist of what they're talking about, you know. I didn't understand the words. And here and there I would understand words, but, you know, they got crayons in their hand and books, and I was like, okay. And then as time went on, I was able to, you know, link words to what they're talking about. And so by about the end of a year in that, I could understand what I thought was a lot. Probably really not that much, you know, in retrospect. It was fun because I was just there and learning, and I was so tired. At the end of every day, I went home and I would just crash out on the couch for about an hour. Like my brain was never so tired. And I guess I'm not really what you'd call a dunce, you know, as far as academics is, but I never really found it too interesting, you know. And well, boy, did it really challenge my mind, and I would be so tired every day, you know, when I would get home. And I stayed there for 5 years. So I wound up, I might have the record for repeating kindergarten and nursery as an adult for 5 years. You know, after like 2 years, when I was there by the second year, I was able to start conversing a bit and helping with the children and what they're doing. And I think by the end of that year, you know, they said, well, I guess this guy's kind of serious, and they hired me as like a teacher's assistant or a teacher's aide. Just a little bit of money, not really much at all. Maybe enough just to say that they were giving me something. You know, wasn't much at all. But I stayed there for 5 years. And by the end of that 5 years, I was speaking quite well. And like when I would go out places, and I knew that if I recognized people that I knew were speakers, I would just make an effort only to talk to them in Mohawk. And well, this, like I'm saying, this was like about 20-something years ago now. It was hard for them. It was hard for our first language speakers to talk to me. because they were only used to talking to their friends and people who they were comfortable with talking in Mohawk to. And so like, you gotta kind of think about that barrier that maybe your speakers have as well, your mother tongue speakers, because it was like a foreign experience for them to, hey, here's an adult and they haven't seen that since they were children when they were seeing adults talk to each other. Or when they were younger adults and talking to their peers, they never seen that before. But I would just talk to them anyway, and then they would, after a while, they would talk back to me in Mohawk, Yeah. So I stayed there for like 5 years, and then I wanted to build a house, so I went ironworking. Well, we're from Nakota. It's a big tradition. A lot of them in there work. High steel in New York City, all kind of cities all over American side, better money in the States. So I wound up doing that. And for a couple of years, I think 3 years maybe. And my wife now, at the time, we weren't married. We were expecting our first child. And so in that interim, when I stopped there, when I was ironworking, that's how I kept up my language, was I would just go talk to people. And also they have a radio show on Wednesdays at noon. They have people come and they talk, and people would call in, and all in Mohawk. And so I would listen to that every opportunity I had, and I would use a lot of old archival materials, old dictionaries that the missionaries would compile, and I would find, it was like the internet was just kicking in, back then. So I was able to find all kind of stuff once I found out about that. And I would start printing these materials, and I would use them as study guides. And then, yeah, so we were expecting our first child, and one night we're at I was at the bar, I ain't gonna lie. I was talking with my friend, and he says, if you want your kid to talk Mohawk, you're gonna have to leave this, Because I was just getting started in looking at that as a career. I was making good money. You work ironwork in New York City, big bucks. Hard work, dangerous work, but you get paid well, really well. And I was like, man, what am I gonna do? I'm like, well, we'll see what happens, And so when he was born, my wife had gone to the immersion school when she was a girl, and but she didn't talk. She could understand a little bit, and say words and stuff like that. And so I talked to her. I said, I can't not talk to our kids in Mohawk. I can't. I said, I work too hard, and I can't not do it. And I said, I'm only going to talk to you in Mohawk too now. It's a rough road, man. I ain't gonna lie. To try to do that when you have two people, when you have a relationship that's established in the English language, and you're both trying to use your own language after that, and like your whole relationship today, because that was BC 2002. Our oldest son was born, but we had dated from 1993 into the 90s. So like we had already almost 10 years together, our whole life together was in English. And so it was like, it was rough sometimes, like to know when to try to correct someone and then when not to, because you get in trouble. You wait to make your wife mad, you might be in for it. And so, just after he was born, they had started a one-year program, because as our mother tongue population is aging, they were all our teachers in the school system, in the immersion programs, and even in outside of the immersion programs. They start noticing, like, we don't got the teachers to replace these people. We don't have people whose proficiency is well enough to replace these people. So they looked at they had immersions in the elementary system, for 40 years. But they still never had any adult speakers come out of that. And so they started a one-year program for people who already had kind of a good proficiency. And they call it Radiwanahirats, and that means they're strengthening the language because they already had a base to start off with. And it was a 1-year program, then the next year, I think that was the cohort you were in it. She was in there, and my wife was in that one. She was pregnant for our daughter at the time. And so it kind of eased in like that. We were able to make our household just in Mohawk all the time. And then they were, as they were starting to get a little bit older, we sent them to another immersion program. Our kids, even though they're in our household, it was all in Mohawk. So, well, they're going to go into this other immersion program. And what we noticed is they're coming home and their language was degrading. Their language was degrading because they're going into there as first language speakers with kids who have no Mohawk. And they just want to communicate, right? And so they started to talk more pidgin Mohawk, like how the other kids, because that's how they're hearing it, They say, well, this isn't going to work. It's not good. We didn't do all this work just for an immersion school to do that. It doesn't really make sense. And so we kept them home. She kept them for I think 2 years or 3 years, and she was homeschooling them. And then she wanted to work again, so I said, well, I'll stay home now and I'll do it. So I stayed home with them for I think 4 years. And at the same time, this adult immersion program was ongoing, and they had upped it from a 1-year program to a 2-year program because they realized 1 year isn't enough, because they wound up after that first cohort, that when they looked around and they realized, like, we really got to get work going on this. We need, if you want our language to come back, it has to be spoken in a home. And to have it spoken in a home, that means adults have to speak it in a home. That has to be the household language. You can't have your kids, it's just like a job, If you're working and you get laid off or you get fired, you don't tell your 6-year-old, oh, I'm sorry, buddy, but you're gonna have to go to work, the family needs the money. That's your responsibility. And that was the reason why I started learning. Because I said, well, if you look at me, like, I don't really look like an Indian man, but that's where I come from. I said, I think of myself as this. I said, that's the least thing that I could do is speak in my own language. That should be like the baseline, At least as I was looking at myself in that way. That should be like the baseline for my identity. I should at least be able to talk in that language. So, when I was homeschooling those kids, that program switched to a 2-year. And one of the things that they have in their 2nd year of that program is they have speaker visits where the students are required to go out and visit with a speaker. And so I started getting some calls from some of the younger guys in there, and they were asking if they could come to talk to me for that. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, come by, when are you going to come? And I was just so surprised at how well these guys were talking. After 2 years, they were talking as good or better than I was after 5 years of being in an immersion. And I was like, what is going on over there? What are they doing? They're doing something that's really good, and I wanted to be part of that. And so the next year they had an opening. And like at the time, I don't know wrong, but they had an opening. One of the teachers had left, and so I applied, but I didn't get the job there. And then the next year again, and I applied. And I've been there this is the 7th year that I've been teaching adult immersion program, 2-year cohorts. And what we do is a mix of formal instruction on the structure of the language and natural speaking. So you have formal instruction on structure, and we use ASLA too, because you're building neurological pathways in your brain, connecting sound words to images in the same way that you learn language as a natural child, and some rote learning, because that's the reason why, everybody speaks whatever language you speak. If you speak English, if you speak Lakota, Lakota, if you speak Spanish, whatever language you're speaking in, you know all that because you've heard it hundreds of thousands of times. You've heard so many repetitions of those things. It's like, you know, if you're driving in a car and all of a sudden this song comes on and you're singing, you're like, what the heck, you know, I never looked at the lyrics on the internet or whatever, you know. It's because you heard it so much. And so we're using all these things and we're really just kind of evolving in how we're teaching. We're trying to figure out effective ways and efficient ways of teaching in our language. And it's been pretty successful in that sense. Like we've gotten some students that have, like they couldn't even say their name properly when they begun, and then leave after 2 years. You know, you can't say they're not a speaker. They might not speak as well as an 80-year-old, but they're not 80 years old. You know, they're only 20 years old or 22 years old. But they speak very well, all things considered. And they speak well enough that they can get involved with speakers to continue their learning in that language for the most part. The ones who are really, really successful, you know, they can do that without a problem. And the ones who are good, successful, like everyone is successful because they all, considering a lot of them start with basically no oral proficiency at all, you know, like they can't converse. They might know names of things, but they can't converse at all. So they're all really successful. But what we're noticing now is in developing our, you know, I guess I'd say like quote unquote classroom methodologies, teaching methodologies, and even learning methodologies, because you know it's a trip to learn your own language. You know, it's a trip, man. It's not like saying, oh, I'm gonna go learn Spanish, right? That doesn't come with any baggage at all. It's not your language, you know. If you learn it, good. If you don't learn it, who cares, right? You're not Spanish, so it don't matter. But when you're thinking about your own language, it can get pretty heavy, you know. And so those are some of the things that we prepare our students for when they're starting to look at that, because you're going to make a million mistakes. You're going to make a million mistakes. That's just the way it is. Everybody does. You all speak English, and I bet you make mistakes in English. Doesn't mean you don't speak English any less, right? Doesn't make you any less of an English speaker. Our mother tongue speakers make mistakes. Doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about. It's just a slip of the tongue sometimes, you know. That's just what it's like to be a person. You know, we make mistakes. It's not a judgment under character. You know. I just want to make one more last point. Where it's gotten us now is, like I was saying, to develop this teaching methodologies and some learning methodologies. But what it's pointing out to us is that even though we're being successful in our program, the overall effort, there's no one unified effort on our reserve for language revitalization. We're working kind of isolated from each other. I wouldn't say that there's an antagonism between anybody, but it's more at an arm's length, and we need to be holding hands or linking arms rather than being at an arm's length from anybody. Because if we want our language to come back, you've got to have adults to speak it. And they got to be able to speak it to their kids. I'm telling you, my kids taught me so much, because kids ask the weirdest questions, you know. They're natural questions, but to an adult, it's weird. You know, my son used to ask one time, we're going at the door, and he said, well, what's that called? You know, the doorbell, the Yokshude. And he looks and says, well, how do you make that? You know how you make a doorbell, you know? But like, they ask you all kind of weird questions like that, that it really challenges your language, right? And so what I would do all the time is, I was always able to stay in the language, like, would just like go around the circumlocute, you know, figure out a way to tell them with a bunch of words. And I would write down what I didn't know, and then I would call somebody, or when I would see someone, I'd ask them, how would you say this? This is what they're asking about, you know? Because that's a big thing too when you're learning your language, is knowing how to ask a question to speakers. You know, because sometimes if you ask something, they'll tell you, they'll tell you a translation of what you said, but that's not what they would say. You know? And then when you go say it somewhere, they're like, who told you that? Nobody talks like that. Right? I don't know if that happens here, but it happens at home. I'll stop now because I think we're getting close. I think he still wants to talk to him then. No.
Skana sa wagwego, katsahayan do ni Ujats, the ones that they get in the Waja, got no wagin in the Wagano, getting a Kahaga, the Mox Carde Wagay, and I don't get the Hanzoni, Gorlorizi, Dagon Perada, Zigato, this with the Jatman, is there out there? Then Honey was on again, Kiwahi, Zia Wadu, they the Batacha Tekra. So the Gardi was someone 30 months ago again, gave in a hoda, and then got the way, I don't get it. So what we born?
Yeah.
So my name is Gazahayando. That's my Mohawk name, which means fires here and there. I don't have an English name. I don't know, you can ask her why, you know. So I'm a first language speaker of the modern age. There isn't really that many who've grown up the way that I have, other than just a very few handful of children who grew up in Ganawage, the Oneness kids. You know, they've grown up speaking the language, and we're getting to that point where they're really progressing, you know. So there's a little bit of hope for our language. You know, people are starting to really see that, the Mohawks back in Ganawage. They're really starting to see that there's some progression going on, you know. Other than that, there's still a lot of work that has to be done to not preserve what we have, but for our language to flourish, you know. It's very important for us to keep on working. So, with my upbringing, I was raised by my mother and my father, and they were second language speakers. Very strong second language speakers. They became very passionate over time, you know, and they attended at the adult immersion program that we have there. They both did, and my mother started the language nest. I was one of the first children to be a part of that. Myself, my younger brother, you know, and we've come a long way since then. Growing up at that time, I was homeschooled, so I didn't really know anything about going to school, public or private or anything like that. I didn't know anything about it. You know, I just knew the home life. Right up until about when I was 6 years old, and then the split happened. My mother and my father, and then. I was sent to immersion school at Gariguanoro. And before being sent to school, I was so used to being exposed to only Mohawk by my parents or by any of the elders that they would invite over to the language nest to speak. So I would always be speaking to them. I was used to speaking Mohawk. I didn't really know that much English. So I get sent into school for the first time. Despite it being an immersion school, all the kids who are around my age going to school, you know, in kindergarten, they only spoke English. So despite the fact that I was going to a Mohawk immersion school, I was exposed to English. So I would come back home and I would be speaking more English, you know, which kind of has like a lot to do with my struggles, still maintaining my proficiency as a speaker myself, you know, and having to balance life between speaking Mohawk at home and speaking English to my friends at school, you know. So I was being bullied because I spoke just Mohawk growing up. You know, and we would have these gatherings, any of the events that takes place in town. and there'd be these kids from this other school, which is like mostly English school, and I would get bullied by them, because they would see me as that target, be like, oh, he only knows Mohawk, you know, we'll bully him, you know. I think we're better than him because we can speak English, or they say we're better than him because we can speak French. So that carried on all the way up to high school. You know, by the time I got to high school, you know, I already knew a pretty good amount of English, you know, other than speaking Mohawk. You know, I was about 8, 9 years old when I first started learning how to read in English. You know, I was able to catch on pretty early, you know, but still, I would get tormented by these other kids who speak English, you know, all the way up until high school when we'd be reading together, you know, studying social studies or whatever, and we take turns reading off of this textbook, you know, and then they would say, oh, don't let Gazahayandu read, he doesn't even know English. And the teacher would actually listen to them and be like, okay, I won't let Gazahayandu read, because he only knows Mohawk. I'll respect that. I was like, what the hell? What's up with that? So, you know, so I stood up, you know, I looked at the kids and I told them, like, screw you, you know, and, I just, I took it upon myself to really try hard to learn, really try hard to be very articulate in the English language all through high school, you know, and then I was starting to notice that my Mohawk proficiency was beginning to dwindle. You know, I didn't really know as much as I would have known when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And my mother and I slowly went on to speaking English to each other throughout my high school years. You know, we just like fell into that. It was really hard for us to maintain speaking Mohawk to each other. So I took it upon myself to apply to that's the Mohawk Immersion Program, to strengthen what I already know. You know, given that I've grown up with the language, I know that I have a pretty strong base that I can build upon. And right before I was finished doing high school, they had this project, this really big high school project that each of us were required to do, was to make documentaries. And it could be about anything, you know, short 5-minute documentaries about any subject that we want. So I decided to make a documentary about the revitalization of Ganiageha, Mohawk language, you know, and I interviewed my 3 people. I interviewed both my parents, and I interviewed one elder speaker by the name of Kasanode. And they wanted us to set a certain goal. Each student who's making their own documentary has to set a goal of what they want people to feel by the end of it. Some people will say, I want to make people think, I want to make people critically think. Some people say, I want to make people laugh. In my documentary, I want to make a funny one. They asked me what I want to do, and I was like, I think I want to make people cry. You know, I want to make people sad. So I decided to do this documentary, and I asked this a few questions to these speakers. And I would be asking them, man, well, what's your journey being a first language speaker? I mean, being a second language speaker. And then they just talk about it, and they talk about it. And then my mother, with an Oscar-worthy performance interview, comes along, talks about her grandmother, you know. And as she mentioned earlier that her grandmother was beaten in residential school or Indian day school, one of those things, because she spoke Mohawk. So she didn't raise her own children to speak Mohawk anymore, and her grandchildren didn't speak Mohawk. So she was talking about that, and when she was talking about that, she teared up a little bit, you know. And as soon as I was able to get that on a clip, I was like, yes! And I showed it to the school. And yeah, some of the teachers were emotional, they cried, you know. And it was a success. I ended up winning an award for best interview. So after that, I ended up going full on to speaking, going on to my language learning journey, just full on. I did it full time, going to school at Nakota for 2 years. And on the other hand, I would be working at like some cigarette stores here and there, you know, whatever, just to make a little bit extra money. And while I'll be working at the cigarette store, I'd be reading books, scripts, and all that stuff. Scriptures, I mean, of Mohawk words, Mohawk stories, you know, phrases and stuff like that. Or I'd be listening to the radio show, you know, while I'm working at the cigarette store. You know, there's not a whole lot of business working at one of these tiny cigarette stores on the reservation, on the res, I mean, you know, because it's just it's so boring, you know, I swear. But I had a lot of time in my hands, so I took that time and I dedicated it to just learning our language, you know, and with being able to have that privilege of being a first language speaker raised by second language speaking parents, I'm very grateful for being able to be at where I am. You know, it was about 4 years ago I graduated high school, and then I applied to Nakota. I was able to carry myself this notebook, which I don't have on me right now, filled with an array of Mohawk words and Mohawk phrases and sayings and sentences and all that I've attained from elders. And I'll be going to this place we have back in Guatemala called the Golden Age Club, which is just like a hangout for where all the old folks will go and they just hang out and play bingo or whatever old folks do these days. You know? And so I would be going there and I would be having conversations with them, and I'd be taking down my notes. And then and then I noticed there was this elderly couple that were there, you know, by the name of Dakota and Guajanze. They're this elderly couple. They're both first language speakers, but despite that, they were there as well, and they were learning, and they were taking down notes. You know, and they were talking to this woman by the name of Gaderi. So Gaderi was teaching all of us, and they were teaching these two, and they're like 80 years old, or I don't know how old they are, but they're about that, you know, and they're just they're writing these notes, and I was like, oh, they're still learning, you know. And the Yoga, the husband, tells me, he says, yeah, it doesn't matter how old you get, you're still gonna learn. There's no end point, there's no final destination or anything like that to your language learning journey. You're always gonna be learning new things. You know, you could be 80 years old and you can know like how to do almost like pretty much every ceremony that you can think of, every prayer that you can do, or every type of philosophy that you can philosophize. You're still gonna be learning new words, new phrases. You know, you're gonna be like, what the heck? I never even heard that before, but that's interesting. You know. So that's what I learned. I was like, okay, there's no ending. There's no destination to my language learning journey. You know, I'm still gonna keep going with this. And because I've grown up with the language, you know, I've been surrounded by so many these adults. You know, going to school and like even back in kindergarten, the teachers who would teach me are second language speakers, and they would be asking me questions of like, how do you say this in Mohawk? How do you say that in Mohawk? And they're asking me, and I'm like 7 years old, 6 years old, and I'm like, well, I don't know, aren't you the teacher? No, but I thought it was really interesting, you know. It wasn't until I got to like maybe the 3rd grade I ended up meeting this woman by the name of Ganita Yandaje. Elizabeth McDonald, you know, and she came along and she taught me like so much beyond what I would have been taught by these younger teachers. No offense to any of them, but I feel that there was like more room for me to really progress, and I want to take that opportunity to do that, and I want to meet these more of these first language speakers like Elizabeth that helped me out at that time. And all throughout high school, I struggled to maintain Mohawk, and I didn't even realize it because I was focusing so much on being articulate in English. You know, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm trying to balance between those two. A lot of the people from Nakota, you know, they say, don't speak to your children in Mohawk. Don't be speaking to your children in your language, because the language internationally, that's all. Everything else is English. So what's the point? Or everything, well, us living in Quebec, you know, everything is French over there. So be like, teach them how to speak French, you know. But I don't believe that. I think we can balance quite well between speaking two languages, being trilingual, bilingual, you know, quadrilingual, however you want to go, you know. It's very important. And to have our children realize that from an early age, to give them exposure to your native language, give them exposure to some English, you know, because after all, English is important to work outside, if ever need be. But the first language that should always be in the home is your native language. That's where it comes the most natural, and that's where the kids should really hear it. That's where they should be hearing it. You know, I'm a school teacher now, and I can very much say that Kaniakeha has become kind of somewhat of a school language or whatever, and then but I try to do my best to keep our language going back at home, trying to encourage people to speak, to encourage people to encourage the adults, parents and mothers and fathers to speak to their children, and Mohawk is very important. You know, some of them, they already have like a really small base of very few phrases of what they know, you know, like what Berhoen has said, like go eat, go sit down, where's the bathroom at, you know, stuff like that. I was like, use those words to your children, you know? Because I know like a lot of them, they don't know how to have a full-on conversation, but I still encourage them, like, well, just use those small phrases that you know. Speak to your children with that. Expose them to Kaniakeha, expose them to, you know, listen to the radio show, listen to some of the elders speak, you know, with your children present. Take them over to the ceremonies at the Longhouse so that they can be exposed to our language in that way, you know, and just do whatever you can. That's what I tell them, you know, these parents, because they get so stressed out, eh? They send their kids to immersion schools, and then they're like, well, why aren't they speaking? And then I tell them, it's like, well, it has to come from the home. It has to come from the home. It has to. Don't leave it up to the teachers. Don't leave it up to the schools to save our language. Don't leave it up to the children to save our language. We leave it up to ourselves to do whatever we can to save our language, and I think that's about enough for me to say today. So thank you everybody.
Before you leave, if you sat in this session, can you come up this way? I have a small gift to give you for listening to the relatives who came all this way. And so if you listen, and then, I'm sorry we went over time, but we don't have a time for questions, but we're doing this same presentation over in the next session. But we also have questions, if they're gonna also be here afterwards if you have questions. But I just want to thank everyone for listening. Lila,